This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're delighted to get to speak to Andrew Heinze today. I know Andy as a former professor of American history at the University of San Francisco and the author of two really celebrated single-authored books in the fields of American religion and Jewish studies. Those are Adapting to Abundance, Jewish Immigrants, Mass Consumption, and the Search for American Identity, and the book Jews and the American Soul, Human Nature in the 20th Century. But if you Google Andy today, you also come across his current website that describes him as an author and playwright, which are now your professions. And the site has news of your plays that are being produced and published and receiving awards. So clearly you did not leave academia out of a desire to stop writing. And when I met Andy for coffee recently in New York, we talked about this change that you made in your life after being a professor for about 20 years. And I felt like this experience would be pretty interesting for our listeners to hear about. I don't think that it's uncommon for academics to contemplate what it might be like to leave academia and try something new. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how and why and when you made this decision.
And thanks, Rachel, first off, for having me on the podcast. That decision came when I was finishing Jews and the American Soul. So I was in my late 40s at that time, and I just had this intensely growing impulse to, I don't know how best to say it, just to explore, to find what I thought might be my truest path as a writer. And so that's when that started, when an opportunity, came, the time was right, and I was in my early 50s. I just decided to make the break because I knew I couldn't continue to stay in academia. And I was not only teaching American history, I was a director of the Judaic Studies program. You know how it is. You're busy. You're really, really busy. A lot of commitments, and so you've got summer. Summer's off, right? But the fact is, you're real busy.
Right. Yeah.
And if you have a sabbatical, you're supposed to be working in your field. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to keep doing what I was doing and also try to find that path, which at the time I thought was to be a novelist. I was writing a novel, and I started writing it, again, right around the time Jews and the American Soul came out, which was that was published in 2004. So I just knew I was going to have to make a break, and I did.
How did you go from writing the novel to figuring out playwriting was more your fit?
Yeah, that was kind of weird, really, in a way, because I'd been working on the novel for some time, and I had an agent who represented me for Jews in the American Soul, very good agent, Carol Mann in New York, and so Carol was already sending out a draft of the novel to publishers, so after I left California, my wife and we moved to New York, and I immediately applied to get into a couple of fiction writing workshops at the 92nd Street Y. And I did succeed in getting, you had to send in a manuscript and then you were accepted or not, a writing sample. So I took one with Mila Goldberg first. That was a lot of fun. I was glad to get accepted to that. And then after that, a semester with Mila, then I applied to another workshop that was being offered with Sandra Newman. And that was also great. So I was plugged myself in very quickly to a fiction writing workshop. And so I had all of a sudden colleagues. After doing that for a bit, a bunch of us from Sandra Newman's workshop decided to get together on our own. So we would meet maybe a couple times a month. I can't remember now, down in the Village in New York. And there were about 6 or 7 of us, a really eclectic, interesting group of writers doing different kinds of fiction, whether it was short fiction or novels. And so that's what I was doing. But I didn't intend. I didn't know anything about theater. I had no background in theater, and that's what I was going to be doing. But one day, this would have been sometime in 2007. My wife and I watched a movie which you may have seen called "Prick Up Your Ears" about the British playwright Joe Orton, who was tragically murdered by his lover. And there's a great movie. It's a great movie with Gary Oldman as Joe Orton and Alfred Molina as his lover, and just was real interesting. And so I became interested in Orton, got his collected plays, and began reading his plays. Orton does farce, a very particular kind of dark farce. And I thought to myself, gosh, this is really fun. I mean, really enjoyed reading it. And I thought, I wonder if I could write a farce. so a play. I'd never written any kind of play. So I sat down and just started, I came up with an idea I liked and just wrote one. And that turned out to go well. So to my surprise, I mean, it took me about 6 months, and there were some steps I needed in order to accomplish it. But then when I finished, I hooked up with a professor of theater and playwriting at Sarah Lawrence, who wrote a great book called The Playwright's Guidebook. And I thought, because I didn't know if it was any good or not. I needed to have some professional look at it and tell me, was it good? Did it need work or what? So I set up a consultation with him. We met, and he said, no, this is a good play. So I thought, well, okay. I really had no idea. I took the subway up. He was up in Hamilton Heights at that point. So I took the subway up, and, I was a little bit nervous. So then that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Wow, this is something I really enjoyed. It was super fun. It was more fun than any other kind of writing I'd ever done in my life. And I felt like, okay, I had an aptitude for it. And so that was what started, opened my eyes to it. I didn't immediately go into playwriting, but that was my first venture.
Yeah, I guess going back to the decision to leave academia, I feel like listeners will wonder, but how could you give up the security of, I mean, you were tenured at that point, that financial decision and just kind of having a settled life? Were there factors that made that more viable for you?
The decision to leave, it's just I knew I had to do that. If I was at that point, like I said, I left, I think I was 51. And so at that point, the clock is ticking. And I'm thinking, if I'm gonna really try to go into a whole nother genre of writing, and again, at first I thought it would be fiction, that's gonna be a real undertaking. So I knew I knew I had to do it. So that's sort of the answer to that. And the giving up the security, to your question, was that hard? No, it wasn't hard. I know it seems like the answer should be yes, it was really hard, but it wasn't. We had the resources we had, but we had just one thing that helped a lot, is you and I talked about recently, is my wife and I lived in San Francisco, and my kids were grown up at this point. So I didn't have any more. As a dad, I didn't need, they were up, and they didn't need me in that way anymore. I would not have gone somewhere else if I had young kids, and if they couldn't come with me. So I was in my second marriage. You're trying to think, how does this make sense? You just take them with you. I had my kids with my first wife when I was in grad school at Berkeley. So we had been in San Francisco living in a great rent-controlled apartment, super rent, and we got evicted because someone bought the building, and they evicted us and our upstairs neighbor, who was a good friend of ours. So then next thing was we ended up buying a house in Berkeley. That house went up in value by 3 times in 8 years. And at the time we were thinking of what to do, we had this big asset, the house. And 'cause I know the first thing my wife said to me when we're walking along, and she knew I was just trying to think, is there some way I can do this? And I was prepared to wait until I was in my 60s and just retire from academia. But she said, well, why don't we sell the house? And I said, what? What do you mean sell the house? We can't sell the house. We have a mortgage on the house. I sort of like, it was just like as if she had just, told me that, I don't know, I should go to outer space or something. For some reason, it never dawned on me. But then once I thought about it and we came up with a plan, different possibilities, what would happen. We had the assets we had. I'd been stowing away a lot of money into retirement because it'd been several years. And so we took the resources we had, sold the house, uh, moved back east. And between, the just being very careful, I had to, in some ways, teach myself to be a good money manager. So I learned about investing. And in a way, the way I was generating income ever since then was through investing. And, so we had some assets and, some good luck. And that's how I managed to do it, in that way. But I mean, we were prepared to live, much more, on a slimmer margin.
Mm.
We just come up with different plans in terms of how tough would it be, and we're just going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it turned out pretty well.
Yeah. You mentioned this is playwriting is more fun than other kinds of writing you've done. What makes it more fun?
Well, well, for one thing, it's all imagination. You don't have you don't have the constraints, of historical writing and, tremendous constraints there, which I kind of enjoyed when I was doing it. The research. I enjoyed doing research, and trying to really be really good and really comprehensive, do the work, get the research done so you have something really substantial. I enjoyed that, but it's really fun when you can just come up with it, make up a story out of your head, and you create characters, and you create a world. So every time you write a play, you're creating a world, and that's really fun. And also, I like dialogue. It turned out one reason I think at fiction, I could have completed the novel, and I think I could have written an okay novel. I don't see myself as ever being, a great novelist. I don't think I have that ability. But what I learned in the fiction group I was with is where I was best. I was not good at writing descriptive, what the scenery looks like, descriptive passages. I was good at dialogue. So I kind of learned that. I realized, okay, so I have an ear for dialogue. And because I really enjoy that, it's fun to write dialogue. And that's the other part.
I imagine too that with playwriting you get to see it out in the world kind of quick. Aren't people reading the work in progress sort of as you write? Is that kind of more satisfying in a way?
You mean workshopping it
Yeah,
until
exactly.
it's done?
Yeah.
Do you mean contrasting it, Rachel,
The
to
kind of writing we
when
do
you're in
is,
academia and you
yeah.
share with a colleague, you mean, as you're going?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it just having people read a script as you're working on it seems like it makes it real.
I hadn't thought about it that way, in terms of it making it real. So I probably wouldn't give you a good answer to that, but if I
Mhm.
rephrase the question,
Go ahead.
um, I mean, the right, when I've been with actors, like for example, more recently, I've been with a theater company now for 5.5 years.
Mhm.
And so the experience of being able to take a draft
Mm.
and get a cast together and then have a good audience. It doesn't have to be a huge audience, but a good audience, smart theater audience, which I've got, you know, in the company.
Mhm.
Uh, it's fun. It's fun because of all the interaction, absolutely. And I get really good feedback, and I love to get feedback. So yeah, it's different than, in academia we'll send a draft to
Right.
a few colleagues,
Yeah.
and that's also really fun. So in some ways it's the same. And sometimes I'm just doing the same thing exactly. I'm sending it to a few
Mm.
colleagues of mine, who are good dramaturgs.
Mhm.
Um, and there were times I didn't workshop all my plays. Sometimes I wasn't with a group of people, and I had only that other approach, to
Mhm.
share it with some colleagues, just as I did when I was doing history.
Yeah. If there are academics listening who are thinking about leaving academia to pursue a creative writing path, such as being a playwright or a novelist, what would you advise or warn them about what might be different or unexpected in making this leap?
I guess the big thing, that's a tough, yeah, I mean, I looked at yeah, I saw that question, and I don't know, that's a little bit of a hard one. I mean, I think one thing is if you're going to go into another genre of writing, understanding it's another genre. It's going to be totally different. So there are skills and things which you can transport, with you. I definitely found that to be true. And my having, written nonfiction and previously definitely gave me, some stuff in my toolkit, which was helpful. But it's a whole different genre. So, but I mean, that's a good thing. That's the fun. So that's actually just kind of exciting. It's not really anything I have any caveats to, that come to mind. Maybe you could tell me more specifically how I could answer that better.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you were just describing makes me think that it's a reminder that you might be a beginner again. I mean, you were in classes and learning
Yeah.
in
Okay.
your fiction classes. It sounds like you were someone who was okay with that, or was at a point in your life when you wanted to be sort of beginner stage again and was open to kind of the wonder and awe of all of that?
That's really well put. I loved it. And I loved being a student again. Now, I didn't anticipate that I would. I wasn't looking for that. Again, I had a novel. I was thinking I'd meet other novelists and we'd sit around and talk novel talk. But no, I found when I signed up, I didn't really realize that I wanted to go into playwriting until 2009, which was a couple of years after we moved back east. And then when I signed up and I took classes in playwriting at the HB Studio, which is a venerable old place in the theater world, and down in the Greenwich Village. And I took classes there for 5 years running with a very good playwriting teacher. And I loved being a student again. One thing is, when you're a professor, as you know, you're the expert. You have to have the answers to all the questions, or at least I felt that I should. I felt a tremendous obligation. I better really know enough. I had to know enough. So if people ask me a question, students or whoever, I need to know this. And with history, people think, they hear you're a professor of history, they think you know about all history,
Right.
everywhere, and for me, I felt a certain burden about that, and it was nice not to have to be that person. I didn't have to know anything, I didn't have to answer questions, and I do like learning a lot. I like learning new things. So yeah, that was a really good, question you just put to me. I loved that. I love the learning. And yes, you're right. Unless a person has some sort of preternatural knack and they just write a novel and it's amazing, and I think there are probably some people like that. Most of us aren't like that. And so we do, as you said, have to start over. But I really liked starting over. It was fun.
Hmm. I imagine too that it was a different kind of culture you were stepping into. I mean, I say that as someone who was part of the theater world a bit when I was in college, and it does, it seems different to me than academia. I wonder how that was for you changing cultures.
That was great. It suited my personality better. And specifically when I went into theater. I also did, again, I enjoyed hanging out with the fiction writers, and that was a lot of fun, reading each other's work, because then you're in that person's imagination, and that's really fun. But theater is a whole distinct universe, right, as you know. And to my amazement, because I had no background, didn't know about it, it was just great. I just love everything about the world of theater. I like the people that are in it, and it's a good fit for my personality.
Yeah. It strikes me that both academia and actually theater are professions where people say this thing, some version of you should only do this if you have to, as in you should have that kind of passion or sort of commitment because it's such a challenging profession. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, but do you see some truth in that for these two paths?
About theater or
Theater and academia both being these kind of challenging fields with a high degree of, I guess, uncertainty and instability.
well, I know I used to tell graduate students, excuse me, at USF, I was teaching undergrads. They didn't have a graduate history program there. But when undergrads would ask me about should I go to graduate school in history, I know what I told them. I mean, my experience, what I learned as a grad student at Berkeley in the 80s, I said, this is really hard. I found it to be very hard, very challenging, psycho emotionally as well as every other way. And it can take a long time. Used to be, maybe still is. History was the longest degree program out of all of them, at least in those days. And so I would tell the students, listen, you have to really want that. If
Right.
that's what you want to do, because it's not easy.
Hmm.
So that's what I'd say to them. Yeah, in theater, one thing I love about it is the people are there just because they love to act, or direct or write, whatever it is. The actors, I know a lot of actors, and there's something very charming, I think, about actors. It's so hard. They put themselves out there. They go to auditions. We're all used to rejections. We send out a manuscript, or you know, looking for an agent or whatever. But actors, it's even worse. They're just putting it all out there, and like in most things, you can have very talented people. That doesn't mean they're going to get famous. Doesn't mean they're going to make a living at it. I know writers who are terrific, not going to make a living at it. I know actors that way. So that's one thing I love. The people in theater, they do it because they just love to do it. They have other jobs,
Hmm.
but they love to do it. And so it's sort of, if you have that, then that's what you're going to do, and you find a way to do it.
Yeah. Now that it's been a couple of decades since you made this leap, I'm wondering if you have a kind of perspective on what it's meant to have these two different kinds of writing careers. Did you need to be the historian or academic in a way to help prepare you for being a playwright, or to realize you wanted something more creative as your work?
I did not need it, no. But I looked at that. You had given me that question as something that you thought would be interesting. So I did look at it, and I thank you for giving me that, because it actually got me to think about something that I hadn't thought about before. I didn't need it in order to go into the arts. No, I didn't. Um, and again, we can talk separately about did I learn skills which helped me? Yes, but in a way, I needed it in a different way. I was somebody. My problem was it was hard for me to focus when I was a young man. I was interested in so many things, and I was doing so many things, and I had kids, and I loved being a dad. So I'm being a dad. I was a martial artist. I was into that. I play guitar, and at different points, I thought, well, maybe I'll be a guitarist, or maybe I'll do this, or maybe I'll do that. I just had so many things that I enjoyed and was interested in that for me it was not easy to. I always liked to write, but it wasn't like that was the only thing I liked. So in a way, what graduate school did for me, it forced me to really focus on that, on this one enterprise. The other things just, were hobbies, which I continued to do, but got my mind, if you know what I mean. It helped me to focus in that
Hmm.
way. It gave me something to do, and it was going to take a bunch of years to do it, and I was going to learn things along the way and get better at it, etc. So I didn't need it to become a playwright, but it really helped me in terms of somebody who always liked writing, always had written since I was a little boy, but needed focus.
Yeah. And in terms of that question about skills that you acquired by being an academic, that especially the ones that were useful for the next stage of your career, what did you feel like it gave you?
Well, first of all, discipline, as you know, very important. You've got to have that if you want to produce anything. Confidence, you know, um, definitely, because I'd seen myself, and it wasn't easy succeeding. I didn't find it easy. I worked really, really hard to succeed at academic writing. Um, but then if you see yourself succeed, you can do it. So confidence, openness to criticism, because the criticism, talk about tough love. Oh my God, graduate school in history, at least in Berkeley, it was brutal. You just have to get a thick skin and deal with it. And it shows you, and you realize I had a very good advisor at Berkeley, and yeah, very tough. But I could see how much I needed it because it helped me to grow, helped me to write better, and so forth. But you know what I think the most important thing is, was failure, and learning how to respond to failure. because when I was working on my dissertation, my advisor, he was in Salzburg for a year on a sabbatical when I got to the point where I really started writing. So I wrote 300 pages when he was away. We wrote letters occasionally, but this was in the 80s. So, you know, long distance calls, you don't do that.
Hmm.
And he came back and he called me in. He'd read the 300 pages, came to his office, and he was a German guy from
Mm.
Germany. His name was Günter Barth.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget this. And he was really terrific, terrific mentor, teacher. He had a very reserved manner. So we sat down in his office in Berkeley across the table from each other. And there was my 300 pages just sitting on the table. He was really neat and organized. Nothing on the table, just my 300 pages. I sat across from him. He just looked at me and he said, "But Andy, there is no thesis here. There is no thesis here." And I thought, what? Whatever I did in those 300 pages, 6 chapters,
Hmm.
I thought I was a chapter away from finishing my dissertation.
Mm.
And then I realized, oh, I didn't really have a strong argument.
Mm.
I didn't have a strong thesis.
Hmm.
And talk about depressed.
Mm.
One of the most depressing experiences of my life was when I walked home after that meeting. I was really down, but spent the summer writing a new outline, 90-page outline, thinking about, oh, I needed to, what's the thesis? And came back, spent the next year, rewrote the dissertation. I was able to use, a bunch of material, but I mean, it was totally different, totally different. That was the adapting to abundance. And the thing about what he had always told me that was good, he said, don't write a dissertation, write to get it published. Don't write a dissertation that's going to sit in a library shelf. And he was right about that, and he was a good guide for that. And so when I rewrote it, I sent it out, and it got a contract right away. And that taught me a really important lesson because it was so devastating. Because it's not 30 pages; it's 300 pages, and I thought I was done. So in a way, that in particular, as well as other times when I'd send an article out, and I thought, oh, this is great, and then I get it back with the editorial reviews, and I said, oh, it's not that great. I need to do more work. But the dissertation was such an epic example. That was really helpful because in playwriting, I think we talked about this, is not always, but often I have to rewrite. I'll come up with a draft. I think it's good, workshop it or get feedback from colleagues and realize, no, 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 it's not right. That's not the story I need to tell. And just rewrite the whole thing. Sometimes really from scratch. That was a really valuable lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had some version of that experience you had with your advisor. Actually, I mean, many of those experiences. And I guess, I mean, it made me think, how has that helped me? Because I think you're right; those experiences are helpful. I think I go in more with the expectation that I'm probably going to learn, how or why this doesn't really work, or it's not
Right,
quite, where I'd like it to be. So it's an opportunity for it to become better.
right. I mean,
Um,
that's great. That's of course the way a person should go into it.
there's two questions that we've been asking all guests, and one of them is if there's something you wish you had known about writing or publishing earlier in your career.
I don't really have a good answer for that, Rachel, to tell you the truth. I don't know. It's sort of like I feel like people do what they're going end up I think that people do what they're going to do. Like I wrote poetry a lot when I was younger, but I didn't really ever go, say, to seek out poets to learn how to be a poet. Okay, well, that was on me. That wasn't somebody else's fault, or,
Mm-hmm.
but if let's say I'd met a great poet, who liked me and said, oh, I think you can be a poet, and then kind of brought me under their tutelage, then I probably would have done it. So I don't know. That's a hard one. I don't really have a good answer for that. It's something I wish that I had known because I kind of just I think I followed the paths that I
Mm-hmm.
saw. And when I was at Berkeley, and especially working with that particular professor, Günter Barth, he had a very analytical, his very analytical way of writing, and The point was to make an important contribution to the historiography. Well, so that's what I did for all those years, and then afterwards. So I was taught to do that. Now, I think you and I talked a little bit, let's say graduate school were different at that time, right? So that, say, popular writers who were really good at reaching a mass audience. Let's say they assigned us Barbara Tuchman or any number of other people who, she was very big when I was in graduate school. And then that was there, kind of the thing that they focused you on. Well, then my attention would have gone that way. I would have thought, oh, that's interesting. So, it changes who you're writing for. It changes what you're going for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so it sounds like part of what you're saying is who is around us, the mentors that we have or that we're able to find, probably do have an influence on the directions we're going.
For me, that was definitely true. Yeah.
I mean, I found that too. I still think of like the greatest deciding factor in my going to grad school was having a professor during my master's say to me, well, you are going to apply for the PhD program, aren't you? And that made me think, oh, wait, this really does, this suits me. It fits. But yeah, having sort of the expert call it out or see it is very powerful.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Another question we've been asking guests is about a writing practice that's working for you. And I think even if this is something that you do with playwriting, it might be helpful for listeners.
My writing practice was a lot different when I was doing scholarly work, or even when I was writing for magazines, for a wider audience. When I went into playwriting, in some ways, one of the best little lessons I got was the first workshop I took with a playwright named Eduardo Machado. And I asked him a question. This was just a 1 month workshop down in downtown Manhattan. And I said to him, because I told him, I'd recently just come out of a very different field where you sit down and it's like, what's your work target? What's your page target for the day? How many pages am I going to write? And then you talk to other people. Well, I wrote this many pages. How many pages did you write? It was sort of like, that was a kind of conversation that was had, right? And he said, well, personally, he said, one, he said, because if you set as a goal 1 page and you do 1 page a day, in 90 days, you're going to have a script. You'll have a 90-page script. And that really stuck with me. And it was great because then I didn't have to worry about pressuring myself. And I haven't, and I don't. Ever since I began playwriting, I don't pressure myself to get a certain amount done. Or even to write it all in a certain day. Sometimes I'm walking around, thinking about a play. And so that was a big difference. It wasn't structured in the way my writing was when I was in academia.
Yeah. For some of us, I think taking off some of the pressure can be really helpful.
Oh God, yeah. No, I think so. Yeah, it's important.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us today, Andy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Rachel. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.